Sir, step away from the vehicle, now! The officer's hand moved to his holster as the elderly black man slowly raised his weathered hands, Purple Heart lapel pin catching streetlight. It was 11:47 p.m. in Maple Grove subdivision, the kind of neighborhood where black faces after dark drew unwanted attention, and Marcus Washington knew exactly what was happening. The 68-year-old sat calmly behind the wheel of his midnight blue Lexus, while Officer Bradley Chen approached with the swagger of someone who'd never questioned his authority. 3 years on the force, clean record, but tonight would shatter everything Chen thought he knew about power. "License and registration," Chen demanded, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like an interrogation lamp. Marcus reached slowly toward his glove compartment, but Chen's voice cracked with authority. "Hands where I can see them." The dash cam captured everything, as did the Ring doorbell across the street and Marcus's grandson Trevor, who held up his phone recording. These black stories, these touching stories become real-life stories when witnessed by the world. Have you ever been judged by your appearance when you held more power than anyone realized? Chen's backup arrived at 11:52 p.m., and Officer Rodriguez stepped out with the same aggressive swagger that had become department standard. 10 years on the force had taught her to follow her partner's lead, even when instinct screamed otherwise. "What's the situation?" she asked, positioning herself at Marcus's passenger door. Chen's response dripped with assumption. "Elderly male, expensive car, wrong neighborhood, claims military service but won't prove it." The casual dismissal made Trevor's grip tighten on his phone camera, but Marcus remained perfectly still. His weathered hands stayed visible on the steering wheel, a practiced response to decades of similar encounters. Rodriguez noticed the Purple Heart on his lapel, the first-class boarding pass on his dashboard, the calm dignity in his posture. Something felt wrong about this stop. Across the street, Margaret Kim had started live streaming without thinking. Her TikTok began with 47 viewers, mostly insomniacs, but as she whispered commentary about police surrounding an elderly black man, the numbers climbed. "This is happening right now in Maple Grove," she said, "and something doesn't feel right." Bao Chou. The algorithm caught her location tag and began pushing the stream citywide. "Step out of the vehicle," Chen commanded, his hand resting on his weapon. "Explain why you're in this neighborhood at this hour." Marcus's response was measured, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd faced real enemies in real wars. "Officer, I live 12 minutes from here. I was returning my grandson to his mother's house after dinner." Chen's eyes narrowed as he noticed the Purple Heart. "That military stuff real, or you buy it at some pawn shop?" The question landed like a slap, revealing everything about his assumptions. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably, her instincts screaming that this was going sideways fast. Margaret's viewer count hit 2,400 as social media began amplifying the confrontation. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call, the screen briefly showing "secure line" before he declined it. Chen caught the flash of text and smirked. "Important call? Let me guess, the Pentagon needs your advice?" The mockery in his tone made Trevor's jaw clench, but Marcus simply checked his watch, 11:57 p.m., and remained silent. Sergeant Morrison arrived as the situation escalated beyond routine procedure. 22 years on the force had taught him to read situations quickly, but the sight of cameras and growing crowds made him default to backing his officers. "What's the problem here?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting Marcus was the problem. Chen's radio crackled with confirmation that the Lexus wasn't stolen, registered to Marcus Washington, but instead of de-escalating, he doubled down. Registration could be fake. Anyone can use someone else's car. The logic was twisted, but it gave him justification to continue the harassment. Rodriguez noticed the boarding pass again, D.C. to Minneapolis just hours earlier, but stayed silent. The live stream had reached 8,200 viewers when Marcus finally spoke again. "Officer, I've served this country for 37 years. I've never had to prove my worth to anyone who wasn't willing to listen." The statement carried quiet authority that made Chen's confidence waver momentarily. Trevor caught the exchange on video, noting how his grandfather's dignity remained intact despite the humiliation. Morrison stepped closer, his presence adding weight to the confrontation. "Sir, we've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. You fit the description." The lie came easily, practiced from years of justifying questionable stops. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once against the steering wheel, a tell that Trevor recognized as suppressed anger. Chen's next move crossed a line that would haunt him forever. "Out of the vehicle now. Hands behind your back." The threat of handcuffs sent Margaret's comment section into overdrive, viewers screaming about elderly abuse and racial profiling. Veteran Traffic Stop began trending as the video spread across platforms. Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time showing Pentagon urgent. He let it go to voicemail rather than escalate a situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. Rodriguez had started questioning the stop in her mind, trying to identify when standard procedure had been abandoned for what looked increasingly like harassment. The countdown to midnight felt symbolic as Marcus sat surrounded by 3 officers, multiple cameras, and a growing online audience that had reached 15,000 viewers across various platforms. His boarding pass showed a 6 p.m. departure from Ronald Reagan Airport. His Purple Heart caught streetlight with each breath, and his expensive watch, a retirement gift, showed 11:59 p.m. Chen's authority complex reached its peak as he opened Marcus's door. "Nobody's calling you at midnight, old man. Stop playing games and get out." The words were barely finished when Marcus's phone rang again, the display showing Pentagon in bold letters visible to everyone present. The moment felt suspended in time, like seconds before lightning strikes. Margaret's live stream audience had grown to 23,000 viewers who were about to witness something extraordinary. Rodriguez finally found her voice. "Chen, maybe we should—" But her partner cut her off with a gesture that would later be dissected frame by frame in internal affairs interviews. Marcus looked directly at Chen, his voice carrying decades of command authority. "Officer, that's my midnight briefing calling, and I really should answer it." The statement was delivered with such quiet power that Rodriguez actually stepped back, some primal instinct recognizing a dynamic she'd completely misread. Chen's response would be replayed thousands of times across social media. "I don't care if God himself is calling. You're getting out of this car." The blasphemy in his tone made Morrison wince, but momentum had carried them too far past the point of graceful retreat. The night air felt electric as Marcus's phone continued ringing, its screen casting blue light across faces that were about to learn the difference between authority and power. Trevor's camera captured everything. Margaret's stream reached 30,000 viewers, and somewhere in the Pentagon, people were getting very concerned about why Colonel Marcus Washington wasn't answering his phone. The phone stopped ringing at exactly midnight, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the tension that had been building for the past 13 minutes. Marcus sat perfectly still, his hands still visible on the steering wheel, while Chen processed what he'd just witnessed. The Pentagon display had been clear enough for Rodriguez to read, bright enough for Margaret's live stream to capture, and official enough to plant the first seed of doubt in Morrison's mind. "Probably just a contact name," Chen muttered, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried moments earlier. Trevor zoomed in on his grandfather's face, noting the slight tightening around his eyes, a warning sign that family members had learned to recognize over the years. Marcus Washington was reaching his limit, and when a man who'd survived 3 combat tours reached his limit, smart people took notice. Rodriguez finally found her voice, the words coming out in a rush of delayed common sense. "Chen, maybe we should run his ID through the system before we—" But Morrison cut her off with a gesture that would later be dissected in internal affairs interviews. "The stop's already in progress. We finish what we started." The supervisor's decision sealed fates that none of them could have imagined. Margaret's live stream had exploded to 45,000 viewers, and the comment section scrolled too fast to read. User after user was tagging local news stations, city council members, and anyone with enough followers to amplify what was happening in real time. Veteran Advocate posted, "This is Marcus Washington, Purple Heart recipient being harassed by cops who don't know who they're messing with." The post was retweeted 847 times in under 2 minutes. The situation escalated when Chen made his fatal mistake. "Hands behind your back, sir. You're being detained for suspicious activity." The words hung in the night air like a challenge to forces beyond his comprehension. Marcus's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once against the steering wheel, a tell that Trevor recognized as suppressed fury. "On what grounds?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from facing down actual enemies in actual war zones. The question was simple, but it carried weight that made Rodriguez step back instinctively. Chen's response revealed everything about his training and temperament. "I don't need grounds. I need compliance." Morrison's radio crackled with an update from dispatch that would later be played in court. "All units, we're receiving multiple calls about the traffic stop on Maple Grove. Media is en route." The supervisor's face tightened as he realized their routine harassment had become a public spectacle. Trevor caught the exchange on video, noting how the officer's body language shifted from aggressive to defensive. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message that lit up his screen. "Colonel, situation monitored. Authorization pending. Joint Chiefs." The message was visible for exactly 3 seconds before the screen went dark, but Margaret's 4K camera caught every word. The comment section exploded with military viewers who recognized the significance of a Joint Chiefs communication. Chen's authority complex reached its breaking point when he opened Marcus's car door. "Out of the vehicle now. This is your final warning." The threat carried the weight of someone who'd never had his authority questioned, never faced consequences for his actions, never encountered someone who held more power than he could comprehend. The next 60 seconds would be analyzed frame by federal investigators, but in real time, they felt like slow motion. Marcus stepped out of his vehicle with the measured movements of someone who'd learned to control every gesture under pressure. His height, 6'2" in his prime, still imposing at 68, made Chen take an involuntary step back. Rodriguez noticed details that would later fill her incident report. The way Marcus's suit jacket was tailored to accommodate a concealed weapon, the precision of his movements, the fact that his shoes were military-grade leather that cost more than her monthly salary. Everything about this man screamed federal authority, and they'd been treating him like a common criminal. Margaret's live stream reached 67,000 viewers when Marcus finally spoke again, his voice carrying decades of command authority. "Officers, I'm going to reach into my jacket pocket to retrieve my identification. I'm informing you of my actions to prevent any misunderstandings." The formal tone was like a verbal warning shot, the kind of language used in situations where mistakes could be fatal. Chen's response would haunt him forever. "I don't care what's in your pocket. You're under arrest for resisting arrest." The circular logic would have been comical if it weren't so dangerous. Morrison finally recognized the signs of a situation spinning beyond control, but momentum had carried them too far past the point of graceful retreat. The parking lot had become an amphitheater, with Margaret's live stream providing commentary to an audience that had grown to include military personnel, federal employees, and law enforcement officers from across the country. Comments poured in from viewers who recognized Marcus's name, his face, his reputation. @Pentagon Vet wrote, "Holy shit, that's Colonel Washington. These cops have no idea what they've done." Marcus's next move was calculated to end the confrontation without bloodshed. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and visible, and withdrew a leather wallet that looked expensive enough to fund a patrol car. "Officer Chen, I'm going to show you my identification now. I want you to look at it carefully." The wallet opened to reveal not just a driver's license, but a federal identification card with clearance levels that made Rodriguez's eyes widen. The holographic seal caught streetlight. The photo was clearly Marcus, and the title under his name read, "Pentagon Consultant, Joint Chiefs Advisory. Chen stared at the card like it might bite him. Morrison stepped closer, his 22 years of experience finally kicking in as he read the identification over Chen's shoulder. The color drained from his face as he realized they'd been harassing a federal official with security clearance higher than the chief of police. "Sir, we didn't know," Morrison began, but Marcus cut him off with a gesture that carried more authority than any badge. "Sergeant, what you didn't know could fill a library," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd briefed presidents and buried soldiers. "But what you're about to learn will change how you approach situations like this forever." The statement was delivered with such quiet power that the night air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. Margaret's audience had reached 89,000 viewers when Marcus's phone rang again, this time showing Joint Chiefs, urgent. The display was clearly visible to everyone present, and the sight of it made Rodriguez actually step behind her patrol car. Chen stood frozen, his hand still on his weapon, his mind trying to process how a routine traffic stop had become a federal incident. Marcus looked directly at Chen before answering the call, his voice carrying decades of command authority. "Gentlemen, I believe it's time we had a different kind of conversation." The statement felt like a declaration of war, delivered with the calm precision of someone who'd actually fought in wars and knew the difference between authority and power. Marcus answered the phone with the kind of calm that comes from briefing presidents under fire. "Colonel Washington, Joint Chiefs Advisory." His voice carried across the night air with military precision, and the formality of it made Chen's hand freeze on his weapon. The voice that responded was amplified enough for everyone to hear, crisp with the authority of someone accustomed to moving armies. "Sir, this is General Patricia Hayes, Joint Chiefs Communications. We've been monitoring the situation via satellite surveillance as part of your security detail." The words hit the officers like physical blows, each syllable redefining everything they thought they knew about power dynamics. Rodriguez actually stepped behind her patrol car, her instincts finally recognizing the magnitude of their mistake. Chen's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, then dawning horror as the implications crashed over him. Morrison grabbed his radio, his voice cracking as he called dispatch. "Control, we need supervisory backup at Maple Grove. Priority 1. The desperation in his tone was captured by every camera present, including the news helicopter that had just arrived overhead. "Colonel, we have visual confirmation of your location through thermal imaging," General Hayes continued, her voice carrying the weight of the Pentagon's full attention. "3 officers have detained you without cause. Should we initiate federal intervention protocols?" The question hung in the air like a sword over their heads, and Margaret's live stream audience, now 127,000 viewers, watched in stunned silence. Marcus's response was masterful in its restraint. "Negative, General. These officers are about to demonstrate proper procedure. Aren't you, gentlemen?" The question was delivered with the kind of quiet authority that made Chen's knees actually buckle. Rodriguez found her voice first. "Sir, we didn't know. We're sorry." The federal identification card in Marcus's wallet told a story that none of them had been prepared to read. Purple Heart recipient, Bronze Star with V device, 37 years of service including 3 combat tours, and currently holding one of the highest security clearances in the Pentagon. The holographic seal reflected streetlight like a badge of honor that dwarfed every symbol of authority the officers carried. "Officer Chen," Marcus said, his voice carrying decades of command presence, "you asked me to prove my military service. Would you like to know what I've been doing for the past 37 years? The question was rhetorical, but Chen nodded anyway, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "I've been briefing presidents, planning operations, and serving on the Joint Chiefs Advisory Council. Tonight, I was returning from a classified briefing about overseas operations." General Hayes's voice crackled through the phone again. "Colonel, we're showing elevated stress indicators from your biometric monitoring. Are you in immediate danger?" The mention of biometric monitoring made Morrison's eyes widen as he realized they'd been harassing someone under active federal protection. The implications were staggering. Assault on a federal official, interfering with national security operations, civil rights violations under federal law. Margaret's comment section exploded with military viewers who recognized the significance of a Joint Chiefs communication. @Military Lawyer posted, "This is a federal official under active protection. These officers just committed career suicide." The comment was retweeted 1,247 times in under 30 seconds, and hashtag Colonel Washington began trending nationwide. Marcus's next revelation hit like a guided missile. "General, please inform the officers of my current assignment status." Hayes's response was delivered with military precision. Colonel Washington serves as senior military advisor to the Secretary of Defense and holds active oversight responsibilities for federal law enforcement compliance programs. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for their careers. Chen's weapon hand began trembling as the full weight of his actions crashed down. He'd threatened to arrest a Pentagon official, mocked his military service, and assumed criminality based on race and age. Rodriguez started hyperventilating as she calculated the federal charges they were facing. Morrison's radio crackled again. "All units, Chief Patterson is en route with federal liaison officers." The boarding pass on Marcus's dashboard suddenly made perfect sense. Ronald Reagan Airport to Minneapolis first class, departing at 6 p.m. after a day of classified briefings. The expensive watch on his wrist was engraved with Pentagon insignia, a retirement gift from the Joint Chiefs. Every detail they'd dismissed as suspicious was actually evidence of his federal authority. "Officers, I want you to understand something," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd buried too many soldiers to count. "I've spent my entire adult life defending the Constitution that protects your right to wear that badge, but I've also spent years investigating departments that abuse that right." The statement was delivered with surgical precision, each word chosen to demonstrate the power dynamic they'd completely misread. General Hayes provided the final blow. "Colonel, we're showing your location is under surveillance by multiple federal agencies as part of your protective detail. The FBI, Secret Service, and Pentagon Security have all been monitoring this traffic stop." The revelation made Morrison actually sit down on his patrol car hood, his legs no longer supporting his weight. Trevor's camera captured the moment when Chen finally grasped the full scope of his mistake. His hand moved away from his weapon as if it were radioactive, and he actually took 3 steps backward. "Sir, we didn't know. We're sorry. We're so sorry." The apology sounded pathetic even to his own ears, inadequate for the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Marcus's phone buzzed with another text. "Colonel, Secretary of Defense Office, immediate debrief required." The message was visible for exactly 2 seconds, but Margaret's 4K camera caught every word. The comment section exploded with federal employees who recognized the significance of a SecDef communication at midnight. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd faced down actual enemies in actual wars, "you've just learned the difference between authority and power. Authority is what you think you have. Power is what happens when you abuse authority against the wrong person." The statement was delivered with the precision of someone who'd spent decades in briefing rooms where words carried the weight of military action. Rodriguez found her voice, desperation making her words tumble out. "Sir, what can we do? How do we fix this?" The question revealed everything about their situation. 3 local officers who'd just assaulted a federal official under active protection, with every moment captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by over 150,000 viewers worldwide. Marcus's response was masterful in its implications. "Officer Rodriguez, what you can do is explain to your superiors how a routine traffic stop became a federal incident. What you can do is describe to Internal Affairs why you thought it was appropriate to threaten a Pentagon official. What you can do is prepare for the consequences of your actions." Each sentence hit like a precision strike, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who understood exactly how power worked. The news helicopter circled overhead, its camera capturing footage that would lead every newscast for the next week. Margaret's live stream had reached 189,000 viewers, and the hashtag #VeteranTrafficStop was trending in 6 countries. Social media exploded with military personnel sharing their own experiences with police discrimination, each story amplifying the significance of what was happening in real time. General Hayes's voice crackled through the phone one final time. "Colonel Washington, we're prepared to initiate federal intervention. The Attorney General's office has been notified, and we have authorization for immediate federal takeover of this incident." The words hung in the air like a nuclear option, and Morrison's radio chatter confirmed that federal vehicles were already en route. Marcus looked directly at Chen, his voice carrying decades of command authority. "Officer, you asked me to prove I'm a veteran. You asked me to prove I belong in this neighborhood. You asked me to prove I deserve to wear this Purple Heart. Would you like to know what I'm going to prove to you?" The question was rhetorical, but the implications were clear to everyone present. The night air felt electric as Marcus's true power became undeniable. Trevor's camera captured everything. Margaret's stream reached 200,000 viewers, and somewhere in the Pentagon, people were making decisions that would reshape how law enforcement approached situations exactly like this one. The next words out of Marcus's mouth would change everything. The Maple Grove Police Department had transformed into a federal command center by 1:15 a.m., with black SUVs filling the parking lot and men in dark suits establishing a perimeter that made the building look like a crime scene. Chief Patricia Patterson sat across from Marcus Washington in her office, flanked by FBI agent Sarah Martinez and Pentagon Security Director James Chen. No relation to the officer who'd started this nightmare. Marcus had changed from his traffic stop clothes into a crisp navy dress uniform, his chest heavy with ribbons that told the story of 3 decades defending American interests overseas. The transformation was deliberate, calculated to remind everyone in the room exactly who they were dealing with. Patterson's hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the federal documentation that Agent Martinez had placed before her. "Chief Patterson," Marcus began, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone who'd briefed presidents under fire. "Your department receives $2.3 million annually in federal grants through the Community-Oriented Policing Services Program. That funding is contingent on compliance with federal civil rights standards." The numbers were precise, devastating in their implications for a department already struggling with budget constraints. Agent Martinez opened her laptop, the screen displaying statistics that made Patterson's deputy chief visibly wince. "In the past 18 months, your department has received 847 formal discrimination complaints. The federal threshold for pattern and practice investigation is 200 complaints per 100,000 population. You're currently at 340 per 100,000. The data was presented with clinical precision, each number representing a career-ending federal intervention. Pentagon Security Director Chen leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of Defense Department authority. "Colonel Washington serves as senior military advisor to the Secretary of Defense and holds active oversight responsibilities for federal law enforcement compliance programs. Tonight's incident constitutes assault on a federal official under active protection. The charges were federal, the penalties severe enough to end careers and close departments." Patterson's voice cracked as she tried to salvage something from the wreckage. "Sir, Officers Chen and Morrison are good officers. They made a mistake, but they don't deserve to lose their careers over one incident." The plea revealed everything about her department's culture, protecting officers over accountability, minimizing systemic problems as isolated incidents. Marcus's response was surgical in its precision. "Chief, Officer Chen threatened to arrest me for resisting arrest before I had committed any crime. He mocked my military service, assumed criminality based on my race, and ignored clear evidence of my federal authority. These aren't mistakes. They're systematic failures of training, judgment, and character." Each word was chosen to demonstrate the difference between excuses and accountability. Agent Martinez pulled up body cam footage on her laptop, the screen showing Chen's aggressive posture and dismissive language in devastating detail. We have 17 minutes of video evidence showing clear civil rights violations. The DOJ Civil Rights Division has already opened a preliminary investigation based on social media footage alone. The federal machinery was already in motion, unstoppable momentum that would reshape the department whether they cooperated or not. Director Chen presented the Pentagon's position with military directness. Colonel Washington was returning from a classified briefing about overseas operations when your officers detained him. The security implications alone warrant federal intervention. The national security angle added another layer of federal authority, making this incident a matter of Pentagon concern rather than local police business. Patterson's deputy chief whispered something about union lawyers, but Marcus cut through the noise with decades of command presence. Chief, let me explain your situation. You have three options: immediate compliance with federal reforms, federal takeover of your department, or loss of all federal funding effective immediately. The ultimatum was delivered with the calm certainty of someone who'd negotiated with hostile governments and understood exactly how power worked. The numbers Agent Martinez presented were devastating in their scope. Federal funding represents 37% of your annual budget. Loss of COPS grants, Byron Justice Assistance, and Homeland Security funding would require immediate layoffs of 43 officers. The financial reality made Patterson's face go pale as she calculated the political consequences of federal intervention. Marcus's next move demonstrated the full scope of his federal authority. I'm recommending immediate implementation of the Pentagon's Law Enforcement Accountability Protocol, developed specifically for departments with systematic civil rights violations. The program was comprehensive, invasive, and mandatory. Federal oversight that would reshape every aspect of department operations. Director Chen outlined the protocol with military precision. Mandatory bias training for all personnel, body camera analysis using Pentagon-developed AI systems, monthly federal compliance reviews, and citizen oversight boards with subpoena power. Each requirement was designed to prevent future incidents while demonstrating federal authority over local law enforcement. Patterson's voice was barely audible as she asked about Officer Chen's fate. Sir, what happens to Bradley? He's young, he made a mistake, but he's not a bad person. The question revealed everything about her leadership, protecting officers over accountability, minimizing systemic problems as individual failures. Marcus's response was masterful in its implications. Chief, Officer Chen committed federal crimes tonight. His fate depends on your department's willingness to implement systematic reforms rather than protect individual officers. The message was clear. Cooperation meant reduced consequences. Resistance meant maximum federal intervention. Agent Martinez presented the consent decree that would govern department operations for the next 5 years. Federal oversight, mandatory reporting, external investigation of all use-of-force incidents, and quarterly compliance reviews. The document was comprehensive, invasive, and non-negotiable, federal authority replacing local autonomy. The financial implications were staggering. Implementation costs approximately $400,000 annually, funded through existing federal grants contingent on compliance. Director Chen's presentation made clear that federal money came with federal strings, and those strings had just become chains. Patterson's final attempt at negotiation revealed her desperation. Sir, can we handle this internally? Additional training, policy changes, voluntary compliance? The request was pathetic in its naivety, asking for trust after demonstrating systematic failure. Marcus's response ended the negotiation. Chief, trust is earned through actions, not promises. Your department has demonstrated systematic civil rights violations. Federal oversight isn't punishment. It's protection for citizens who deserve better. The statement was delivered with the authority of someone who'd spent decades defending constitutional principles. Agent Martinez closed her laptop with finality. The Attorney General's office has approved federal intervention. You have 48 hours to sign the consent decree or face complete federal takeover. The ultimatum was delivered with bureaucratic precision, but the implications were clear to everyone present. Director Chen's final statement demonstrated Pentagon authority. Colonel Washington's security detail has been upgraded to federal protection. Any future incidents involving military personnel will be treated as attacks on federal officials. The warning was clear. The Pentagon was watching, and local autonomy was contingent on federal compliance. Patterson's signature on the consent decree was barely legible, her hand shaking as she signed away 5 years of departmental autonomy. The document represented complete federal victory, local capitulation, and systematic reform that would reshape law enforcement practices throughout the region. Marcus stood as the meeting concluded, his uniform a reminder of the authority that had just reshaped an entire police department. Chief Patterson, you asked what Officer Chen can do to fix this situation. He can serve as an example of what happens when authority is abused against the wrong person. The statement was delivered with quiet finality, a lesson that would echo through law enforcement training for years to come. The federal SUVs pulled away from the police station at 2:30 a.m., leaving behind a department transformed by a single traffic stop. Patterson sat alone in her office, staring at the consent decree that would govern her department's operations for the next 5 years. In the distance, she could hear the sound of protesters gathering, their chants demanding justice that federal intervention had already begun to deliver. 6 months later, the Maple Grove Police Department looked like a completely different organization. The federal consent decree had transformed everything from hiring practices to daily operations, creating a model that other departments across the country were being forced to study. Officer Bradley Chen sat in a mandatory cultural sensitivity training session, his third this month, listening to a lecture about implicit bias from the same Pentagon consultant who'd redesigned their entire approach to community policing. The numbers told the story of systematic change. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 89% since the federal intervention, from 847 in the previous year to just 93 in the 6 months following Marcus Washington's traffic stop. The department's new AI-powered body camera system analyzed every interaction for signs of bias, flagging problematic language and escalation patterns that supervisors reviewed daily. Chen's transformation had been the most dramatic of all. The 29-year-old officer who'd threatened to arrest a Pentagon official now spent his afternoons volunteering at the local Veterans Affairs office, learning the stories of men and women whose service he'd once dismissed. His partner, Rodriguez, had become the department's liaison to minority communities, a role that required her to face the consequences of systematic discrimination she'd once ignored. The technology changes were revolutionary. Pentagon developed software analyzed voice patterns, body language, and escalation indicators from every body camera recording, creating a comprehensive database of officer interactions that federal monitors reviewed weekly. The system had flagged 247 potential bias incidents in its first month, leading to mandatory retraining for 23 officers who might have otherwise continued problematic behaviors. Marcus Washington had become something of a folk hero in veteran communities nationwide, but his real victory was quieter and more systematic. The Pentagon's Law Enforcement Accountability Protocol had been implemented in 47 police departments across 6 states, each one forced to confront the same systematic failures that had led to his midnight humiliation. The financial impact was substantial. Federal grants now came with mandatory compliance requirements, and departments that failed to meet anti-discrimination standards faced immediate funding cuts. The Maple Grove Department had actually received increased funding, $2.7 million annually, because their compliance rate had become a federal showcase. Sergeant Morrison had been demoted to patrol officer, his 22 years of experience counting for nothing against his failure to recognize federal authority. He now worked night shifts, his pension reduced, and his authority stripped, a living reminder of what happened when supervisors failed to supervise properly. His replacement, Lieutenant Sarah Kim, was a Korean-American veteran who'd restructured training to emphasize constitutional rights over officer safety. The community response had been transformative. Property values in Maple Grove had actually increased as word spread about the department's federal oversight and reformed practices. The neighborhood where Marcus had been stopped now featured a small memorial garden honoring veterans, maintained by residents who'd witnessed the confrontation that changed everything. Trevor's video had been viewed over 12 million times, becoming a case study in police academies nationwide. His grandfather had used the footage to create a documentary called Midnight in Maple Grove, which was now mandatory viewing for federal law enforcement training programs. The film's profits funded scholarship programs for minority students pursuing criminal justice degrees. The legal consequences had been swift and comprehensive. Chen faced federal civil rights charges, but received a suspended sentence in exchange for cooperation with the federal investigation. His testimony had revealed systematic training failures that led to policy changes throughout the state. Morrison received similar treatment. His career effectively ended, but his freedom preserved through cooperation. The broader impact rippled through law enforcement culture nationwide. The phrase Maple Grove Protocol became shorthand for federal intervention in discriminatory policing practices. Departments across the country implemented similar AI monitoring systems, fearing the kind of viral exposure that had transformed a routine traffic stop into a federal case study. Marcus continued his Pentagon consulting work, but now spent weekends speaking at police academies about the intersection of military service and civilian law enforcement. His message was always the same. Authority without accountability becomes tyranny, and tyranny has no place in American policing. The systemic changes were measurable and lasting. Officer retention rates improved by 23%, as problematic officers were weeded out and replaced with candidates who understood that community policing meant serving all communities equally. Complaint resolution times dropped from months to weeks as federal oversight demanded accountability. Most importantly, the traffic stops themselves had changed. Every interaction was now recorded, analyzed, and reviewed for bias indicators. Officers approached vehicles with the understanding that their actions would be scrutinized by federal monitors, who had the power to end careers and close departments. The transformation of Maple Grove became a symbol of what was possible when systematic discrimination met systematic accountability. Marcus Washington had proven that individual courage, combined with institutional support, could reshape entire systems of power. The midnight traffic stop had become a dawn of reform that would protect countless other citizens from the humiliation he'd endured. These touching stories, these real-life stories of systematic change, reminded everyone that Black stories matter precisely because they reveal how power actually works in America when courage meets opportunity. 2 years after that midnight confrontation, Marcus Washington stood before a packed auditorium at the FBI Academy in Quantico, his Purple Heart catching the light as he addressed 300 new federal agents. The man who'd been handcuffed for driving while Black had become the architect of the most comprehensive police reform program in American history, his quiet dignity transforming a personal humiliation into systemic change that protected millions. The Maple Grove incident, as it was now known in law enforcement circles, had sparked the creation of the Federal Law Enforcement Accountability Initiative. 47 states had adopted the Pentagon Protocol, and discrimination complaints nationwide had dropped by 34% as departments scrambled to avoid federal intervention. The AI monitoring system developed from Marcus's experience now analyzed over 2 million police interactions monthly, flagging bias before it escalated into federal cases. Officer Chen had completed his community service and now worked as a civilian trainer, teaching new recruits about the cost of assumptions and the power of accountability. His transformation from antagonist to advocate had become a cornerstone of rehabilitation programs that emphasized education over punishment. Rodriguez had been promoted to sergeant, her experience with federal intervention making her invaluable for departments seeking to avoid similar fate. The financial impact was staggering. Federal oversight had generated $847 million in compliance improvements across participating departments, while discrimination lawsuits had dropped by 67%, as systematic reforms prevented the incidents that once required expensive legal settlements. The program had paid for itself through reduced litigation costs and improved community relations. Marcus's grandson, Trevor, now a freshman at Georgetown studying criminal justice, had used his viral video to launch a nonprofit organization documenting police interactions nationwide. The Trevor Washington Foundation had recorded over 50,000 traffic stops, creating a database that researchers used to identify patterns of discrimination and develop targeted interventions. The legacy extended beyond law enforcement. The Maple Grove Protocol had been adapted for use in corporate diversity training, educational settings, and military programs addressing systematic bias. Marcus's calm response to discrimination had become a masterclass in transforming personal injury into institutional change. The most profound change was cultural. The phrase, "prove it," had become synonymous with the dangerous assumptions that led to systematic discrimination. Training programs nationwide used Marcus's story to demonstrate how authority without accountability destroys the trust that effective policing requires. These life stories, these real-life stories of courage meeting power, remind us that individual actions can reshape entire systems when dignity refuses to surrender to discrimination. Marcus Washington's midnight traffic stop had become a dawn of accountability that would protect generations of Americans from the humiliation he'd endured with such quiet strength. The black stories that matter most are the ones that transform pain into progress, turning personal courage into systematic change that benefits everyone. Marcus had proven that the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or violence, but the quiet insistence that dignity and justice are non-negotiable American values. What discrimination have you witnessed that needs to be addressed? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters in continuing this conversation about justice and accountability. If this story inspired you to demand better from the institutions that serve us all, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change through courage and principle. Together, we can ensure that dignity and justice aren't privileges, but rights that every American can depend on.